This is another iRaw podcast. We podcast to make the world a better place for animals.
This is the Talking Animal Law podcast, brought to you every 2 weeks by the UK Centre for Animal Law and hosted by Paula Sparks, Director of A-Law. But it's not just for lawyers, it's for anyone who cares about animals. So no matter who you are, if you want to know more about animal protection, news, ethics and animal law reform, then this is the podcast for you.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Talking Animal Law. In today's episode, we'll be talking about proposed legislation to ban the sale and marketing in the UK of unethical tourist attractions involving animals abroad. Specifically, we'll be focusing today on the Asian elephant, and I'm very pleased to welcome Duncan McNair, the founder and CEO of Save the Asian Elephants. As well as running STAE, Duncan is also a prominent corporate litigation lawyer. Described in the Legal 500, that's the leading peer and client review directory of recommended lawyers, as indefatigable and is named as the client's champion. Duncan was chairman of the McNair Inquiry and Report in 2013 on the welfare of farmed animals, commissioned by the RSPCA. In recent years, he has been regularly invited to address all-party parliamentary groups on animal welfare and on endangered species regarding the plight of the Asian elephant. And in 2017, Duncan was part of a small key group representing 220 charities and MPs in presenting a letter to the Prime Minister at 10 Downing Street demanding the abolition of the UK ivory trade. A proposed ban was announced very shortly afterwards. In 2018, Duncan was named winner of the Animal Hero of the Year award at the Animal Stars Awards, which attracted 850 nominations nationally. Duncan frequently publishes on animal welfare issues of national interest and is the author of a series of best-selling humour books. Hello, Duncan. Thank you for coming to talk about the elephants with us today.
Well, I'm very pleased to do that, Paula. Thanks very much for inviting me to.
Well, should we start with the elephants? What do we know about the lives of elephants? Because from what I've read about them, they're very intelligent, family-orientated and emotionally complex animals.
Yes, there's certainly all of those things. And I'm quite sure there's a great deal more that we're yet to know about them. Elephants have extraordinary complexity in cognitive understanding and knowledge, which in a way makes it all the sadder, the brutal treatment they are so often put through. They live in a complex maternally led society with dominant females at the top, because the males often live away from the females, except when they come to mate. It's quite normal in the case of the subspecies of Asian elephants that there are at least 4 generations of females in a herd, including the babies, of course. They are extremely intelligent. They genuinely do have extraordinarily long memories. They are very family orientated, and they are very complex emotionally. Their society is complex. For example, when a female elephant gives birth, many of the adult females attend upon her to reassure her and to help her emotionally. When a member of the herd is ill, they gather round, they go and fetch food for the ill person, for the ill elephant. When the end is approaching, they fall very silent, occasionally just gently stroking their ill companion. And after the passing, then they enter a period of mourning, which I think we would recognize as human in many ways. And these are just some insights of what we've spotted. And I often think that the complexities and the other beauties, really, of non-human animals are largely unknown. And it's a reflection on humans, not on the other species, that we have limitations on how much we know. And it's certainly true of the elephants, yes.
But maybe because elephants are such fascinating animals, people really do want to see them, touch them, interact with them. So why is STAE urging people to be wary about tourist attractions involving elephants?
Okay, so STAE, you mentioned, that's Save the Asian Elephants, which is my organization of which I'm CEO. Well, what's good, what people think is they want is not always good either for the animals involved or for they themselves. And the problem is that elephants, Asian elephants included, are wild animals, and they would not tolerate close encounters and having people clambering over them for rides or to make them play football or darts or stand on top of each other and all these other unnatural activities unless these were enforced by the brutality and fear that goes with it. And so it is not good to be in direct or close contact with elephants. It's indicative that they've been brutalized. Furthermore, elephants can be extremely dangerous, especially when provoked by violence, which is the sad situation with most captive tourist elephants. So firstly, elephants can and do attack and indeed kill. And STAE, Save the Asian Elephants, has been compiling enormous compendious evidence of the amounts and severities of attacks. We've interviewed people whose loved ones have been killed in front of them by brutalized elephants. And also, they are highly effective when they're broken down in tourism, for example, and kept in fetid close confinement. They are highly effective transmitters of deadly airborne pathogens like TB, which kills millions every year across the world through various mediums, and also quite possibly COVID-19 and SARS and so on. But secondly, or I should say thirdly, in addition to those things, the unethical end of elephant tourism is much associated with the transacting of human trafficking. And so that too is no good for humans. So the idea that we want to get near to and touch and interact with them, well, they're much more fascinating in their natural state, observed from a safe and respectful distance in genuine sanctuaries and wildlife reserves. They're truly wondrous. People don't really want to see them standing on their heads or doing tightrope walks or fooling around with darts and so on. It's not beautiful. It's very sad. And yet the reality of their natural life is truly wondrous.
You mentioned the brutalizing aspects. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Because some people who are unfamiliar with this area may just see the elephant looking happy. They may seem very comfortable in their environment. What sort of training have they been through for them to perform those sorts of activities on the whole?
Okay, well, as I said, elephants are wild animals, and you couldn't wander up to a lion, for example, and jump on its back without consequences. Likewise, an elephant, they are mighty, they can be unpredictable, and so on. Elephants are not tamed by the brutality they go through. They are subdued by fear, which erupts into violence quite often, in fact. What happens is that baby elephants are illegally snatched from the wild, unlawfully in countries like India. It's entirely unlawful to poach elephants. So the babies are snatched away from their mothers, who are usually killed in front of them when they try to protect them, as are other herd members. The baby, far too young to be separated from its mother, is taken into isolation, starved and dehydrated, kept awake with massive noise, and then beaten, stabbed, ripped with hooks. The most awful, terrible abuse. And to see a baby elephant screaming and crying as it's beaten in front of other elephants who can't help is a truly, truly dreadful sight. And so this is done, it's loosely called pujan, the breaking of the spirits. It's a Hindi word. To break their spirits for easy use in tourism. It is indeed no part of the Hindu faith, which is a good and peaceable religion. It is a modern manifestation to try to quickly subdue and quell an elephant into submission for easy use in tourism, to to meet an ever-growing market. It's really awful, and the brutality is enforced daily throughout the sad and attenuated lives of elephants in captivity by the fearsome use of the bull hook and other weapons upon the elephant. It's no life at all for the elephant. It's a tragedy and it's an outrage.
And is this going on a sufficiently large scale to have an impact on the elephant population, or are we just talking, very small numbers of elephants affected?
We're not talking about small numbers. We're talking, well, considering the depleted numbers of Asian elephants through man-made interventions, we're talking about very large amounts. I mean, of course, many would say, well, the abuse of any elephant is wildly wrong in itself and a matter for remarkable commentary. But indeed, it's ubiquitous and widespread, and it happens all over the place. STAE has been very careful to build schedules of hard evidence of the extent of these sorts of abuses, and they are prodigious. So we've identified around 300 venues where just UK-based tour companies alone are advertising these venues where we know brutality to happen. And it's very widespread. Yes, we believe it is having a serious effect, not only on the individual elephants, but on the prospects for the species as those numbers dwindle, and as the risk of them entering the last phase towards their final extinction happens. It's very, very serious and very awful.
It's very sad. And is it a different situation for elephant rescues and sanctuaries? Because people may see these sanctuaries advertised and think, well, actually, this is fulfilling an important conservation function and rehabilitating elephants injured in the wild, perhaps. So is there any difference in those type of establishments, or is there a variation?
Well, the answer is there is a variation, of course. There are genuine and benign sanctuaries and wildlife reserves. There are, at the other end of the scale, the most brutal, terrible, abusive places, and I've seen those as well. These words like sanctuary and rescue centre are elastic terms when you get into the field. Everything becomes a sanctuary, and yet they're nothing of the sort very often. And I could let trip off my tongue very quickly many so-called sanctuaries that are brutal holding stations to traffic on an elephant illegally, or indeed to hold it for the most extreme commercial exploitation. Yes, there are genuine sanctuaries, and you can pretty quickly tell what they are. If you go to STAE's website, which is stae.org, we identify not a long list of those that are good or bad, because today and tomorrow are different stories. What's good today may not be tomorrow, and so on. But they do identify the defining characteristics of a genuine sanctuary. And those can be best classified as places where there is no direct contact between human and elephant, except in those exceptional cases where some veterinary intervention is called for instance. But they are not characterized by constant people all over them, riding, touching, stroking, selfies, playing games, tricks, and so on. And there are various other characteristics, but we need to be extremely careful separating out those very, very few genuine facilities where, for instance, elephants have had a leg blown off by a landmine, let's say, and they're being rehabilitated, perhaps with a prosthetic, and it takes time to fit it and deal with it and so on. And those many other places that loosely throw out the term sanctuary to encourage, frankly, tourists, unwitting tourists, and people ready to spend money on these miserable creatures, on watching these miserable creatures. Yeah.
And is this taking place across many countries in Asia? And are there similar problems for the African elephant? I know STAE is Save the Asian Elephant, but Do you have a sense of the landscape outside of?
Well, yes, now sadly, there are only, I think, 13 range states where Asian elephants remain indigenous to the country. Even when I started on this with STAE 7 or 8 years ago, there were about 20. Now there are only 13. More and more countries are losing entirely their indigenous populations of elephants. And the answer to your question is that, yes, in all those countries, these sorts of horrors and abuses happen to differing degrees. The only country I know of where there are still indigenous Asian elephants who are generally pretty well looked after is Bhutan. And indeed, the former Prime Minister, 3 times Prime Minister of Bhutan, is a member of our team, a hugely distinguished chap who promotes wildlife and a more natural way of life for humans too, eschewing many of the so-called modern conveniences and inventions that are limited, cars, for example. So it's very widespread. It does not confine itself, by the way, to Southeast Asia. There is hideous abuse visited on Asian elephants across the world. I'm afraid to say the USA is one place where elephants are freely used in zoos and circuses in the most brutal way, and other European countries, Spain and Italy as well, to a lesser degree, also abuse them. As to African elephants, well, their narrative is sad, but it's rather different from the Asian elephants in that African elephants generally, and I'm only speaking in those broad terms, are left unmolested in the wild, but their life might be suddenly ended very quickly for their tusks or for their body parts by a bullet to the head, often a misplaced bullet, or other horrific deaths. All we can say, and it's invidious to compare between the two species of elephant, is that the African elephant's narrative is different. It's very sad as well, because African elephants are generally, through their life, left unmolested. Their life might be suddenly and brutally ended by a bullet, or indeed not suddenly ended, a misfired bullet, and so on. For their tusks and other body parts. It's a tragedy. All we can say, and it's invidious in a way to make comparison between African and Asian elephants, is that the African elephants are about 15 times more populous than Asian elephants. It's the latter, Asian elephants, whose numbers are desperately low. But for both of them, it's a tragedy. And it's a great danger for the survival of the species. This abuse, by man exploiting these precious creatures for profits, really.
And there will be those listening to this who think it's really interesting and they're concerned about what's going on around the world, but don't see the relevance to people living outside of Asia. So why is this a relevant issue for national legislation, whether it's in the UK or elsewhere?
Well, let's think. The essential component, the driver that inspires the brutality to Asian elephants is tourism. And the great bulk of that is tourism from outside the country where the elephants live. So, for example, in 2016, there were 2 million visits to a combination of 2 million visits to India and Thailand by British people. 40% of whom, 1/3, I should say, of whom to Thailand wanted to have an elephant ride. And yet there are only under 3,000 surviving Asian elephants in Thailand. You imagine the intensity of work that they're put through to provide all these rides. And a ride is not a benign thing. We can discuss it, but it's a brutal thing and it's unrelenting. And they often die through exhaustion, through heat, through lack of food, through lack of shade, and so on. So it's the tourism. Now, in this country, the UK, we can influence consumer behavior. We can, as in other fields of law, we can seek to regulate and to limit what people can and should see or be encouraged to see. We have no dominion, no jurisdiction here in the UK over the abuse of elephants directly in, let's say, India or Thailand. We can't legislate for what happens there, but we can seek to regulate and legislate what people are allowed to advertise here. with respect to abroad. And of course, there's precedent in other fields. And so it's extraordinarily relevant. If someone decides to book, a holiday in Thailand, and they want to make part of it an elephant trip around different sites, well, they are effectively directly contributing to the decline of the elephants, assuming they go to unethical sanctuaries. It's got everything to do with what we are doing here, not just in the UK. And STAE's intention is not that proper regulation and raising of awareness in the UK is the end of the matter, rather that it's the beginning of the matter. And we, through our massive petition and polling, draw colossal support from across the world. Indeed, from the range states themselves, as well as from the Western Bloc and many countries that have no traditional culture of animal welfare at all. China, India itself, Russia, and so on. And people wonder whether the human populations of those countries have a heart and a soul for animals, and they do, not least for the elephant. So of course it affects what happens outside the country, because if there were no tourists into it, a great deal of this abuse, perhaps all of it, would subside into nothing, because there's no money in it for anyone.
And in fact, it looked as if there was going to be some progress, because the government announced that there would be a ban on the marketing and advertising of unethical animal tourist attractions. And we're anticipating this being taken forward in the Animals Abroad bill. So where are we now with that bill, Duncan?
Well, yeah, as you say, the last year, 2021, the government announced in absolutely black letter, unqualified terms, its determination and its intention to introduce law to ban the advertising and sale of access to venues abroad where elephants are brutalized for tourism. It could not have been clearer, and it was announced with a great fanfare immediately after the Queen's speech in May 2021. STAE has led some 25 meetings with the Prime Minister's officials at 10 Downing Street and with the Environment Ministry, DEFRA, at a senior level. And those promises have been reiterated repeatedly. So we were set fair. We have a draft bill that we were asked to produce, that government has. And there was every indication this was going to happen. There was, as you might know, there was a consultation with the so-called EFRA committee in September last, and so on. And many, many promises from ministers, those others who should know, that this was to happen. And then we all waited and waited. And come the 10th of May of 2022 in the Queen's speech, there wasn't a jot or tittle of mention about it, nor about the Animals Abroad bill generally. There was a throwaway line, which is customary at the end of the Queen's speech, that other measures may be presented by government beyond those mentioned above. Well, who knows? Who knows? But the sadness is that this, as it were, top level, highly important measure, much pronounced upon and trumpeted by government, has withered into silence. And all of us wondering, not just for the elephants, but the other good causes that animal welfare groups espouse, what on earth has happened and why has it happened? And we're seeking hard answers to this, and assurances now that in the coming session, because they're still being offered by certain ministers, yes, indeed, the elephant provisions will be introduced into legislation. If the government, frankly, is in pursuit of popularity, it knows by now that there is absolutely overwhelming support for this ban. It's certainly running at 90% and probably higher. And it's very sad that what looks like a last-minute change was procured through the views expressed at the last minute by a very, very small number of senior politicians that somehow persuaded government to do a complete U-turn in the face of millions and millions and millions of people wanting this ban.
Can we leave it to self-regulation? What about the tourist industry itself?
Well, that's been a total disaster. The industry has been self-regulated for decades and decades. And indeed, there is some so-called guidance by the Association of British Travel Agents, ABTA, which they said for many years was quite good enough, but it's not. I'm a lawyer, as you are, and we can normally sniff and see a very poorly drawn document from a long way off, and this is one of them. It is full of holes. It is largely meaningless. It is indeed not compulsory upon anyone, and it has no sanctions. It has no mechanism for enforcement, and it has no remedies whatsoever for breach. Therefore, it's largely not known about in the travel industry, and its take-up is virtually zero. So those who proclaim that sort of self-regulation, in other words, marking your own homework, will do the trick, need only look at the facts. Elephant numbers have plummeted. The abuse of elephants has increased. Nothing has been resolved. More and more companies are marketing these brutal venues and so on. And sadly, amongst the evidence that STAE has collected is an abundance. We have an enormous schedule called Schedule of Broken Promises of Change. And on it goes. And the numbers of venues, abusive venues, UEVs, the government's adopted our terminology on that too, has ever risen. So I'm not aware really of almost any sphere or time of human life where self-regulation, as I've said, marking your own homework, has ever been effective. What is needed in a fragmented and complex market where this abuse is peddled and promoted in many different ways is the uniformity of law, a law that bans the advertising and the promotion of these dreadful places, these awful venues, and which, crucially, assists in steering the market towards ethical standards, frankly, away from rank commercial exploitation. So we say law is needed in place of this chaotic, catastrophic situation. And you might imagine that when we engage with both the companies conducting this, peddling this abuse, and those who purport to represent them, we get no proper answers at all. Nothing.
And yet, as you say, you've had huge public support for STAE's campaign, for the proposals for law reform, which is really amazing. And I think it's worth just pointing out to people as well that you are actually a volunteer-led organisation. You're really reliant upon people supporting the organisation, raising awareness and spreading the word about what's going on.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, when I founded STAE, which was in January 2015, after my first trip the previous year to India, I took the view that our priority was to raise public awareness, not raise money, but raise public awareness. That was completely crucial, and to link it to credible, coherent policies, and then to use all legitimate means of pressure, public advocacy, and sometimes private exhortation, to promote those policies for change, including a change in law. You're right, none of us get paid a penny, and we would never take it. Very few of our expenses are reimbursed. Of course they are if anyone wants, and we're so grateful for their help. And yes, we rely upon the public's generosity, but I've tried to set up and predicate STAE on a very low cost basis, and it can be done. We all have other jobs to keep wolves from our doors, but we love the cause, and as we say, we do it for nothing, but we do it for everything. There's a burning desire to help, and we think we can, and we have very little money, but we have, I hope, a lot of fight and a lot of purpose.
Duncan, thank you so much. Good luck with all the work. I know that as well as working full-time in the legal practice, you're 100% dedicated and passionate to this cause. So thank you for everything you're doing, and thank you for coming to talk to us today.
No, thanks very much, Paul. It's really nice to talk to you, and thank you for your time, and to all those who listen.
Thanks very much, Duncan. Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can discover more about this topic on ALAW's website at www.alaw.org.uk, including ways to get involved with STAE and contribute to animal advocacy on behalf of vulnerable species such as the Asian elephant. Please do remember to subscribe to this podcast on your favourite podcast platform so that you do not miss future episodes. And please leave us a review, which will help others to find us.
For more information about the work of the UK Centre for Animal Law, please go to www.alaw.org.uk.
For more great iRaw podcasts, visit irawpod.com. That's IROARPOD.com.